You make a decision in a meeting. It's a solid call. The logic is clear. The room moves on. But later that night, you're still thinking about it. Not because the decision was wrong, but because something about it didn't land cleanly inside you. You reread the email, adjust a sentence or two, check the tone again before you click send. A few years ago, that probably wouldn't have happened. You would have made the decision, communicated it, and moved on. If decisions have started taking more effort lately, there's usually a reason. And it usually has nothing to do with losing confidence or losing your edge. Most of the time, it means you've been carrying something in the room that no one sees. And once you see this pattern, you start recognizing it in almost every leadership room. Welcome to Soulfire Leadership. This channel is for leaders who are successful on the outside, but starting to notice the internal side of leadership becoming more complicated than it used to be. In the last conversation, we talked about something many experienced leaders eventually become: the stabilizer in the room. Today, I want to show you what that role quietly starts doing to your decision process over time. If you've been in leadership long enough, something subtle tends to happen. You become the person who stabilizes the room, not because anyone officially assigned that role to you, but because you're capable of doing it. You notice when the conversation is escalating too fast. You hear the tension under what people are saying or not saying. You see how one sentence could push a discussion in the wrong direction. So you pause before speaking. You choose your words carefully. You phrase things in a way that keeps the room moving instead of blowing up. And most of the time, it works. The conversation settles. People nod. A decision gets made. From the outside, it looks like composure. But internally, something else is happening. You're not just contributing, you're regulating the room. And many experienced leaders have been doing that for years without realizing it. Here's where the cost shows up. Not during the meeting, later, afterwards. You sit down to send an email summarizing the decision. You reread it, not for accuracy, for tone. You imagine how different people might interpret the wording. You tweak a sentence here, you tweak a sentence there, and then another. You rehearse a conversation before you have it. You anticipate objections before anyone raises them, and you find yourself saying, "Let me sit with this overnight." And there's nothing wrong with that statement. There are decisions that we do have to sit with overnight, if not longer. But you're doing it more often than you used to. Nothing is technically wrong. You're still respected, still capable, still making good calls. But your brain is working harder than it used to. And that internal busyness makes something important harder to hear. Your first instinct. You can still analyze the options. You can still see the implications. But that clean internal signal of this is the right move starts getting buried under all the variables you're managing. This is the part that confuses people because confidence hasn't disappeared. You're still competent. Your track record is intact. And externally, nothing suggests anything is slipping. So when decisions start feeling slower internally, it's easy to assume the problem must be you. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I'm losing my confidence. Maybe I just need to focus harder. But the issue usually isn't intelligence, and it's rarely capability. It's bandwidth. Over time, you become extremely good at anticipating reactions. You know how different personalities will respond. You know how decisions ripple through organizations. You know what tension feels like when it's about to surface. So before you even check your own read on the situation, your brain starts modeling everyone else's. Eventually, those predicted reactions start getting processed before your own judgment. And when that happens, decisions naturally start taking more energy. If you've been the stabilizer in the room for a long time, you may recognize this moment where you realize the decision itself isn't the hard part anymore. It's carrying everyone else's reactions to it before they even happen. Not because you're unsure, but because you're carrying more variables than you used to. This is important to understand because many leaders misinterpret this moment. They think something is wrong with them. They think they've become hesitant or indecisive. But what you're experiencing is usually accumulated leadership load. You've been the adult in the room for a long time. The one who absorbs urgency, smooths the tension, prevents unnecessary escalation. That kind of containment requires cognitive effort and energy. And when it becomes constant, it starts competing with something that used to be easy, accessing your own clarity quickly. You're not less sharp. You're just running more calculations in your head than you used to. Something interesting happens the moment you recognize this pattern. You stop assuming the answer is to think harder. Instead, you start noticing when anticipation is taking over. You catch yourself preparing for pushback that hasn't happened yet. You notice when you're adjusting a decision to avoid discomfort rather than because the decision is wrong. And slowly you begin separating two different questions. What do I actually think? And how will this be received? When those questions stop blending together, decisions start feeling different again. Cleaner, less noisy. You choose, you communicate it, and you move on. Not because leadership became easier, but because you stopped carrying the reactions that haven't happened yet. Leaders who have been carrying the room for a long time often recognize this moment. The decisions themselves are still sound, but they require more internal negotiation than they used to. And that's often the signal that leadership has shifted from strategy to something deeper. Not more effort, orientation. Returning to yourself in leadership rarely feels dramatic. Most of the time, it just feels steadier. And once that steadiness returns, something surprising happens. Decisions start feeling lighter again. Not because the stakes changed, but because you stopped carrying the room before the room even reacts. If these conversations are useful for you, you might want to subscribe here. This is the work we explore every week.